Hello, this is Virtual the Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. I'm participating in the Team Australia 2022 Australia Day tournament, and so far, 4 wins out of 4. Yay! This game was quite exciting after I made an egregious blunder in the opening, resulting in being down material for most of the opening and middle game. My opponent played very well, and so kept their advantage for most of the middle game, until disaster. A one-move blunder where they hung a piece. Please enjoy! Okay, let's start with the review. So I played with white pieces in this game, and as you can see this blunder here, that little red dot. That's where, my advantage from the opening was completely lost, and the opponent held the advantage for most of the opening and middle game. Though you can see I gradually creep back towards almost to neutrality. And unfortunately for my opponent, they made a mistake here, a blunder of their own, which resulted in a win for me. So not terribly accurate game for me, 75%, opponent around 66. And we each had some good moves, and they had a great move, which was right at the opening, which immediately took advantage of my egregious blunder. I had probably a little bit fewer inaccuracies, though did make some inaccuracies of my own in the middle game, and that's that blunder, and they had some blunders too. So the chess.com bot reckons that this was a chaotic game, and I suppose it was. Let's move on now to the analysis. Alrighty, so I play the Vienna, or always try to start with the Vienna. So e4, e5, and knight c3. Opponent plays knight c6. I play bishop c4, and they play knight f6. So this is the Vienna game, the Max Lang variation, Max Lang defense. Here, and here, I need to admit I was perhaps being a little bit arrogant when I was playing. I was on a train heading towards the city and getting notifications on my phone, and then just playing on the phone, shooting out some moves. Thought, oh look, I'm pretty familiar with the Vienna. Don't need to think too hard. So here I played f4 immediately, so almost like the Vienna Gambit, though of course in this variation it's not the Vienna Gambit. Opponent captures the pawn, and I capture back, and of course that is a straight out bad move. So minus 1.8 in favor of the opponent, because of course that allows the opponent can just fork those two pieces. And I should have just seen it, but I was just shooting up moves on the phone, not thinking very clearly. Now, interestingly enough, my opponent didn't actually see that at this point, and I still didn't see it, so I played another silly move. So it develops a knight e2. Here, the computer reckons straight out with the wayward queen, potentially attacking the weak f7 pawn, and by doing that allows you to potentially evacuate some of the pieces. Now, the best move here, if I did see, the opponent, made a blunder because I didn't take advantage of those two pieces being able to be forked with a pawn. The other thing that can be done at this point is just to immediately pull the knight back. So that potentially is the best move as well. So they make a great move. It's a fork. As soon as I saw that, I thought, oh, I wonder if I'm going to lose this game, because it'd be pretty difficult to pull out of this one. So look, one of them are going to be lost. So capture that pawn. They took the knight. Here I played d3. So still not the best move. I was a bit rattled. Now with the knight there, being able to move to these squares, trying to move the pawn to control the movement of the knight is probably good. They capture, I capture back with pawn. Opponent now plays queen e7 with check. And here I thought, look, I need to fix my my position. So my position is already not as good as the opponent's. I've already lost a pawn. However, you know, if we end up trading queens, at least they'll be largely not developed, and maybe I can try to fix the position. So that's what I did. So we traded queens, and at the end of this this debacle, I'm at almost minus 3.5. Opponent plays well, so knight e5. Here I play bishop f4, so I decide to prioritize development. Were they going to capture? I thought possibly not. I now castle, move the king out of the way. Opponent plays bishop g4, so they're developing as well. So at the moment, around sort of minus 1.6. So I'm not quite as bad. So basically, the way to know, I've one pawn less. That's the -1, and my position is also not quite as good. To sort of defend that knight, because things are a bit precarious at the moment, I decide to move rook ae1. Also, I thought just putting a rook on that file would potentially be good. Almost -4. So according to Stockfish, straight up capturing was better. I'm sure Stockfish is right. So opponents short castles. Here I do exactly what I thought, what Stockfish said. I whacked that knight. They capture back. Here I sort of asked the question: are they going to move that bishop? You know, so I thought they will have to do that, giving me giving me a turn not to have to move that pawn. So they bring bishop all the way back to d7, which is probably a good move. Here, because it's out now of the way, I can push the pawn to d4 with now also an attack on the other dark squared bishop, and of course that pawn is defended. So pushing the bishop back. Here I advance knight c3, and part of my thinking here is, you know, the opponent has pawns which are better organized, but my pawns may be a little bit better developed. You know, I've got an isolated pawn here. However, my sort of rook commands that file. This rook commands that file. Their rooks are not really in the game, or at least this rook certainly is not really in the game. And if I could bring an extra attacker onto that square, then with 3 attackers, so let's get rid of all that. So with 3, if we could get 3 attackers, then I could capture that pawn and equalize. At the moment, obviously I can't, because if I capture back, I can't capture back because the king is a defender as well. But potentially, I was thinking if I could get maybe the knight to this square, something like that, or you know, something like so not that way, sorry, something like that with an extra attack, then that potential would be quite strong. Not the simplest thing to do, of course, because that's a few moves away, and the opponent is going to be watching for moves like that. Opponent plays c6, which doesn't change a whole lot for them. So here I start the maneuver, so I'm trying to get to that square, if you remember. However, opponent plays a bishop b4, now with an attack on the rook, so I have to move the rook out of the way. Here I opted to play rook d1. So potentially, you know, there could be a push there. Now, interesting, Stockfish is always right, wanting to bring the knight there. Not so sure about that. Opponent plays b5, big push forward, you know, attacking the bishop. So bring bishop back. I wanted to stay on that diagonal. Opponent brings the bishop all the way back to e7. I'm not so sure that was the best move for them. Here, I decide to I have to abandon that plan because, you know, the bishop is now guarding that square, which means the knight will not be able to attack from that route. So bring it back. Attack that bishop. And here I was fairly certain that that was a bad move for the opponent. And if you can actually see Stockfish, so I'm materially, it should be -1, but only minus 0.39. And I think what's happened is the opponent has undeveloped their bishop all the way back to the back rank. And that means that they have now unlinked their two rooks. The rooks no longer see each other. Now, the opponent did have to do something because the bishop was being attacked, here, and they can't go here, can't go here, can't go here, and of course that doesn't make sense for them to capture that pawn. So I think in a sense it made sense to come all the way back. However, that weakened them positionally. Here I bring the rook back to the e file, so back to an attack. The opponent, quite wisely moves their bishop out the way, so bishop f6, and I sort of squandered some of that advantage. I didn't quite see the best way of moving forward. Here, I didn't want to move the rook back to the d file, so I pushed that forward to protect the pawn. And here, the opponent unfortunately makes a one-move blunder. So that bishop is now hanging, and unfortunately, I often in sort of beginner intermediate games, if you make enough shuffling moves, eventually someone blunders. Now I did see that right away, so that captures, and now almost +8 for me. And so unfortunately, because now I've captured the piece, I've got the space advantage, my rooks are active, it's looking quite bad for the opponent. And so here it was really a matter of just converting. So bishop f5, however, that doesn't work. I now can potentially get multiple attackers onto that weak f7 pawn, and pretty much things are over. So they moved the king out of the way, which probably wasn't quite the best move, because now I have that with check. The best move I thought for the opponent is just straight out capture, but they chose not to. And here I actually missed that mate in two. The mate in two is this. That's basically a double check, and that rook is also defended. So the king is forced to go only to one square, and then that's checkmate. So again, the rook is defended. King can't go here, can't go here. That square is defended. So that would have been a mate in two. However, as typical for me, I often don't see mate in twos. Opponent may play that move, and what I saw was I could just straight up capture. So I was still in the. I was thinking I needed to liquidate a few pieces before I could checkmate. So I thought, oh, that's good. I can straight up capture that bishop because that's a discovered check. King now forced to the h8 square. Now straight up capture the rook. So opponent sort of lost 3 pieces over 3 or 4 moves. They capture back, and that's a forced move. Here, at the mating net. So the knight attacks. The opponent makes the wrong move, so I decide to move the king rather than move the rook. And now it's basically it's pretty much unavoidable. So that is now again a discovered check. The opponent can sort of delay the agony by potentially blocking the discovered check with the rook. However, they just move the more human move, which is king back to h8, and then last move checkmate. So rook defended by the knight. The rook, of course, controls all these squares, and that square is controlled by the bishop. So good game for the opponent. They played very well. I made a very, very silly move in the morning. In the morning while I was on the train. And unfortunately, they made a blunder towards the end of the middle game. GG. This was a tough match in the middle game, with it effectively being a battle of manoeuvres between the opponent's bishop pair and my bishop and knight. Some of my disadvantages, in context, can be seen as advantages, a silver lining as it were. For instance, although I didn't have the bishop pair, the bishop and knight can do something that the bishop pair cannot. They can attack the same square. Having one fewer pawn, with it being isolated, meant that I had semi-open files. My rooks could exert an influence on the middle game, while my opponent's rooks were mostly locked behind their own pawns. I certainly didn't play perfectly, but having fewer inaccuracies does allow for a gradual improvement towards a less disadvantageous position. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.